So I want to add my welcome on behalf of the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America as well to all of you here for our community leadership program. It is such a wonderful highlight personally of my year to come here, to be with you all, to do this pilgrimage from North America here to Israel, to do an activity that's still countercultural for so many American Jews, which is to come here and instead of going to Yad Vashem and the Kotel and the Dead Sea, to come to the heart of Jerusalem to study the big questions that face us as a people. So welcome as well on this incredible, unseasonably cool night in Jerusalem. Our conversation tonight, which actually picks up on some of the themes that Daniel opened up in his shiur, gets at several questions about gaps and bridges. Tonight we're going to talk about gaps and bridges. The gaps that exist within the North American Jewish community, generational, political, and otherwise, and the gaps that are emerging and have been emerging since the founding of the State of Israel and to now between these two extraordinary projects of Jewish life in North America and Jewish life here in Israel. In order to navigate this conversation, I'll say a little bit more about positioning the problem that I want us to address. Our panel tonight are three people who constitute, together with me, a increasingly endangered species, which are Jewish thinkers and leaders and activists who see themselves as inhabiting comfortable space in both of these communities, whether their upbringing was in America and are now here, whether their upbringing was in Israel and having spent time in America. In fact, one of the things that unites the three panelists together is that they all live in Israel and they all have roots in some way in California. And it evokes actually one of the kind of an interesting phenomenon in ancient Jewish history, which was in the period of time when there was Rabbinic Judaism in the land of Israel and Rabbinic Judaism flourishing in Babylonia. You had two civilizations that were producing something that had deep similarities but totally different cultural universes. And there were a small number of people, nechute, who traveled back and forth between these two communities, carrying the traditions of Babylonia to Jerusalem and Jerusalem to Babylonia. And the processes of actual and linguistic and idiomatic translation that had to take place between these two sustained some sort of, sometimes theoretical and oftentimes real bridge between two communities that were actually building something different. And I'm thrilled to have with us tonight, to open up this conversation on generational gaps, political gaps, and ideological gaps, three people who live, embody, and in many ways understand the particular mechanics of diaspora Jewry with empathy and I think with appreciation about diaspora Jewry, and who understand, appreciate, and now live the complexities of Israeli Jewry here in Israel. I'll speak more about them when I introduce them. As we well know, in playing out some of these gaps, what we've been living through in the last number of years is an extraordinary shift in Jewish history, which is that roughly 70 years ago, starting roughly 70 years ago, and for one or two generations, the State of Israel served as the most powerful organizing force for American Jewry, and within two generations has become the most powerful disorganizing force. It went from being centripetal to centrifugal. And the consequences of this shift, whether we understand this as the product of political issues, right, ideological difference, which sometimes people play out as being malicious. What are you doing wrong that makes you incapable of being in relationship to the State of Israel? Or diaspora Jews critical of the State of Israel for doing things wrong that make it hard for diaspora Jews to be in relationship? So you have a whole ideological sphere for reasons that damage this relationship. And then there's a whole other set of issues that have nothing to do with malice or ideology or politics, but simply the natural passage of time. These communities are evolving and unfolding along ethnic lines and ideological lines and political lines that in some ways suggest to us that a gap between these two places can't be helped. So this is now one gap, is the gap emerging between Israeli Jews and diaspora Jews. A second key gap is the gap that is emerging as a consequence of all of this change between Jews in North America and other Jews in North America about the State of Israel. Israel is the site of the most conflict among North American Jews, more than any other issue by far. And it connects to a third big gap that I want us to explore tonight, that even our CLP program has some embedded features this year that we haven't before, which is an attentiveness to the growing generational and ideological gap between different eras, different age groups of Jews in North America, that sometimes maps cleanly onto the ideological debates and sometimes defies explanation. Our goal tonight is to explore these gaps more thoroughly and to try to interrogate whether they should be fixed, and if so, how. To do that, I have on stage with me three friends, colleagues, and I think extraordinary thinkers and leaders. From my right, Rabbi Dr. Wiener Dow is a research fellow here at the Shalom Hartman Institute. He is also a member of the faculty and the rabbi and the educational director of the Hartman Institute's gap year program called Chavruta, which brings together 30 Americans and 30 Israelis for a year of living together and studying together here in Israel. And therefore, Leon, together with Chaya, who I'll introduce shortly, is not only thinking about the questions of what it means to be a Jew in this period of time in Jewish history, but doing a tremendous amount of education in the field in an experiment of whether Israeli and diaspora Jews at age 18 can build a relationship that is defying possibilities for Jews of older generations. To his right, Chaya Gilboa is the director of the Chavruta Gap Year program. And formerly a scholar in residence in Paideia in Sweden, as well as a Jewish agency Shlicha to Russia and Ukraine, and a director of Israel programs at UC Berkeley. Chaya as well is an educator within this program, and together with Leon, they shepherd and steer the educational, experiential, and leadership components of this radical new program, which has only been around for a couple of years. And to the far right, not in general. Yoav Schaefer, originally from Santa Barbara, California, lives here in Israel and studies politics in Tel Aviv, made Aliyah in 2006, served in the IDF, and has now worked in fields related to Jewish education, Israeli politics, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yoav, together with his family, founded the Avi Schaefer Fund, which seeks to promote mutual understanding among Jews, conflict resolution and leadership development among young adults, and is committed to the values embodied by his late brother Avi towards projects that would seek reconciliation and resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Together with the Hartman Institute, the Avi Schaefer Fund this summer, and our friends from the Avi Schaefer Fund are here, are participating in the Hartman Community Leadership Program, and brought into this program a group of 12 or so, 15, 11. I don't want to say young adults. I would just say adults who are different than the normal demographic of the Community Leadership Program. And they are having in some ways, self-enclosed experience within CLP, but in other ways are blending into this program. And we hope that the participants in this program, instead of asking us, as you do every year, why don't young people come? I would like you instead to reach out to the folks who are here and engage them into the very conversations about the Jewish future that might be possible here in ways that are less possible back home. I want to start with you, Chaya, and ask whether, I want you to give us a little bit of sense based on the Chavruta experience, this experience of bringing together Israeli and American kids, what gaps you see. Whether the generational gaps that we oftentimes talk about are as pronounced in real life, and what are the sites of real deep challenge between the Israeli 18-year-olds who you see and the American 18-year-olds that you see?
Okay, toda. Yeah? So I'm not going to speak about the cleaning situation in the apartment, where you can definitely see a big differences between Israelis and Americans. But I think it's a serious question, and I think it's the hardest question that we need to kind of find ways to talk about during the year. I will say maybe two main things. Something that you didn't mention is that it's not only Israelis and Americans. It's not only that the Israelis are, in the end of the program, are going to the army, and the Americans are going back to campuses, which is a completely different state of mind. We also have religious and non-religious kids on the program. And when it comes to the Israelis, you see it very clear. You see secular people and Orthodox kids. When it comes to the American community, it's much more diverse. You see kids who are 17 years old, and they are Reform. They are conservative. So I think, first of all, the biggest challenge that we deal with when we start the program is how you create Shabbat in the program that everyone feel comfortable. And then this is where you can see the biggest differences between those two communities. Because when it comes to the Israelis, the whole relationship between religion and state and the public domain, and that the public domain, if you want to make a Jewish, must be Orthodox. When it comes to the American kids, it's much more complex. And you see the things that the Israelis don't even think about comes alive in the first week of the program. So this is, I think, one area that I definitely can see as one of the biggest differences. And of course, I think the obvious one, but it's not an obvious one, I will say maybe the main definition for the Jewish identity. Israelis who come to this program, I will tell you a secret. We enjoy, like we often say, it's a leadership program. But those kids are not leaders yet. They're about to become one. But most of the Israelis that are coming to the program basically just afraid to go to the army. They feel like they need to take a year to really develop a vocabulary to speak about who they are before they're going to serve the army, to protect the land. They need to know why they are protecting this land, what the relationship that they have with the land. It's not an obvious relationship like it used to be. And they're coming, and Israel is it's a central place in their Jewish identity, of course. And the Americans who come here, many of them also will share the same feeling, which they're not ready to go to college. They know that in college they need to face many identity questions about Israel, about them being Jewish, being Zionist, and they don't have the answer to it. But you see that for those Americans, Israel, it's something that for some of them, it's not a central a place in their identity. It's something that they want to question. They're not always very happy with things that they see in Israel, and they want to put in a question mark around the question of their relationship to Israel. And there you see sometimes a clash. Like you can see that the Israelis, for them, you can't even question the relationship to the land. Maybe because they're going to the army in a few months. So I think those are two of the main areas that I definitely can see the differences.
So Leon, I'm curious for your take as well in terms of the differences that you see. I'm also wondering whether when you get surprised in the classroom about whether differences and not, and to share a little bit about the outcomes. Do you see in this encounter between Israelis and Americans that it actually winds up being effective at building a bridge between these two communities?
So let me start by saying that I want to talk about the banal differences because I think in a lot of ways the banal differences are very, very instructive. They relate maybe in terms of your opening words to those kind of historical and cultural shifts that have occurred. But what I think is the most interesting and in many ways most challenging are those areas where we can't find a clear conversational point. It's relatively easy to say, let's talk specifically about Israeli politics and how we're going to deal with it. It's more difficult to talk about deep cultural differences, about how we relate to learning, about our concepts of excellence and what my personal goal in life is. And whether I am a failure because I didn't go to college, or whether that has no effect on me whatsoever. Whether the group constitutes a central part of my experience, and I want the group experience to be central to my year here, which is the case for most Israelis, or no, I come here as an individual, and I am in a certain sense an individual consuming and experiencing a certain program, and if the group component isn't central to me for my year experience, then please let me out of that, or let me play that down. I think that actually what's interesting and in many ways most challenging is that what we are dealing with are not simply ideological chasms, but deep cultural chasms of people who have grown up in different cultures. And I'll tell one anecdote from the year that we spent in Berkeley. I have our oldest is 19 years old, and we were in Berkeley for a year. I was doing a postdoc at Berkeley, and she was in 9th grade at the time, and she had in her class a young woman whose last name was Israeli. She was Israeli, and or her parents were Israeli. And at some point, we said to her, Yael, maybe you'll hook up with her early on, after a week or so. She's Israeli, and she looked at us and she said, she's not Israeli, she's American with Israeli parents. By which she meant she's cut, without even understanding fully what she was saying, she understood that these are totally different cultures, and which animate the way people think, the way people learn, and so on and so forth. And so I think that those gaps are actually in many ways the most formidable, because they're very, very hard to turn into an educational program. They're very hard to make explicit and to confront head on. In terms of what we are doing that is successful, what I would say is the most successful thing that we do is in many ways those moments where their entire existence becomes a non-issue. That is to say, at the end of Shabbat, when they are doing Havdalah and singing Shavua Tov to each other and going from one person to another, and you can tell that they are not making any effort to move from Israeli to North American, or when they're in rooms with each other, or when they're looking out for each other. And those are the moments when I think that we're aware of the fact that it is possible. It's complicated work and it's time-consuming work, but it is possible to create significant points of connection, which not only overcome the gaps. In a certain sense, I don't want to get to what you want to get to earlier, but now, which allow those gaps to be not become the only focal point.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of the industry of bringing diaspora Jews together and Israeli Jews together tends to happen here. Long cultures of mifgashim, ways of bridging that gap is oftentimes requires of diaspora Jews coming to America. But I'm sorry, the other way around. Diaspora Jews coming to Israel. But there is also, and I want Yoav to address this. There is also a huge culture and a rising one. Our institute is implicated in this as well, in what's called Israel engagement, which says it's not about having diaspora Jews encounter Israeli Jews, but what do we have to do to help connect diaspora Jews back to the story of the state of Israel? Yoav, I want to ask you a hardish question, which is there tend to be two educational objectives in Israel engagement, in that whole field of Israel engagement. One is building civility, enabling people to talk nicer to each other, to not allow Israel to be the thing that you fight about. And another agenda, which is building passion for Israel, getting people animated and excited to be in relationship to Israel. And even though in the field of Israel engagement, these are seen as two compatible things, we shouldn't fight about Israel, we should love Israel, almost by definition, I wonder whether they are in conflict with each other. Whether when we get people to be civil with each other, we're actually asking them to turn down the temperature about something that we're trying to get them to be passionate about. I'm curious how you think about the relationship between these two. Do you think that we have to make a choice in Israel engagement between getting people riled up and getting people to talk nicely to each other?
Thanks for asking an easy question. First of all, I just want to say that my family and I are deeply honored to be here and to be able to partner with Hartman in this way. I want to especially thank you, Yehuda, and the Institute for welcoming us. And I want to encourage all of you throughout the course of the coming week to engage with the participants that are a bit younger than the average participant here. These are people that have spent many years engaging in this space, thinking deeply about these issues, and they have a lot to say about them. So I hope that you'll take advantage of their presence here. And I think that spaces like this that provide an opportunity for intergenerational dialogue are incredibly important to promoting a more civil discourse within our community and bringing about the kinds of conversations that we hope to see more broadly. So to try to gesture an answer to your question, Yehuda, I want to speak about a particular trend that I see in the American Jewish community that I think is not always identified, which is American Jews, younger American Jews, that are feeling increasingly alienated by Israeli policies, as Yehuda mentioned, in particular the occupation in the West Bank and continued expansion of Israeli settlements, but also trends in Israeli society that are increasingly causing them to be concerned about Israel's future. And these American Jews see these trends in Israel as deeply concerning to Israel's future. And they also want American Jewish institutions to be receptive and responsive to their concerns and fears. But what is often happening is that American Jewish institutions are dismissing them, are not being open to their voices, are questioning the motivations and sincerity behind their discontent with Israeli policies. And the result is that these American Jews are feeling increasingly alienated not only by Israel and Israeli policies, but also by American Jewish institutions who see their critical engagement with Israel as not as stemming from a place of deep love and concern for Israel's future. That is, as a manifestation of their deep care about and love for Israel. And so that is to say, in answering your question, Yehuda, or trying to gesture an answer, that I don't see at all a tension between, on one hand, promoting a more civil and open and respectful discourse within the Jewish community around Israel, and at the same time, recognizing the deep tensions that exist in our community. I think that, in general, I think that there are two broad tasks that our community needs to pursue that are mutually, in some sense, I think mutually reinforcing, not mutually explicit, mutually opposing. One is promoting a more civil and respectful and inclusive discourse within our community that reflects the broad diversity of opinions vis-a-vis Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict within the North American Jewish community. And on the other hand, undertaking a serious undertaking and confronting the reality in Israel today fully and honestly, and also confronting the responsibility that we as an American Jewish community have for shaping or influencing what happens here and helping to bring about a final status peace agreement. And I think that actually those two tasks are related to one another in the sense that the former is a precondition for the latter. I don't think that we can have a serious and open conversation about the responsibility that we as a community have without first doing the work of creating a more civil and robust discourse around Israel within our community that is more inclusive and tolerates a broad range of opinions. And we can't do the latter without that. I think the fear or the concern is that the former becomes a stand-in for the latter, and becomes a way for us to shift focus away from the more difficult conversation about confronting the reality and the responsibility that we bear for working to change it. And I also think that the desire for unity and for solidarity cannot come at the expense of endorsing or supporting positions to which the vast majority of American Jews and maybe Israeli Jews are opposed. So that's kind of gesturing it.
So I know Chaya wants to speak at this as well, but I want to ask you one more question before I go to Chaya, which is, see, the part of the problem is that if you take the position that American Jews have no agency or role in really resolving the conflict here, and therefore what we need to do is to tone down the differences of opinion in the American Jewish community. I don't know what's going on. We have to tone it down because and I use this language a lot. We're allowing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to take casualties in the American Jewish community, right? And the band of tolerable opinion in the American Jewish community is much narrower than it is in Israel, and it's having huge consequences for the next generation of Jewish life. I'm with you on that. But that takes for granted that we don't really think that American Jews can be change agents in this conflict. If we do think that American Jews can be change agents in this conflict, then the fact that people have really different opinions from one another can create the legitimacy of trying to shut down those opinions. If I think your opinions about ending the occupation are actually going to have consequences for Israel, and I think those are dangerous consequences for Israel, then my trying to close down your opinion is not because I'm suppressing free speech, it's because I actually think you're powerful. So I'm wondering, I don't want to get to the where's the red line. I'm not interested in that conversation. But I am curious about that tension. When you want to make the Jewish community be more open and civil and tolerant of different positions, does that imply that it's precisely because we don't think that those opinions actually have impact? Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, I think part of the challenge is that our community, I think, and I think a lot of people in my generation and others see it as already implicated in what's happening here, and that there is often a double standard in our community. To criticize Israel from the left is a stab in the back. To criticize from the right is okay, and that when we think about our roles in affecting or influencing what happens here, we often are blind or ignore what's already happened here for many years on the right in terms of supporting institutions, supporting political parties, a very active engagement by the American Jewish community in a lot of what's happened here. So I think what I'm trying to say is that there's already reality that is happening that is already happening on the right, and a lot of the criticism that I think you raise is something that is applied unilaterally to the left in ways that don't feel equal.
Feel fair. Okay. Chaya, you wanted to weigh in on that?
Actually, I wanted to add two things to what you said at the beginning. First, I will share with you that I'm Israeli. You can hear, born and raised. And when the first time I came to Berkeley, working with students, my feeling in the end of the first year was that the students can talk only about the conflict. And most of them cannot say anything about anything related to Jewish philosophy and Jewish ideas and rituals. They only could talk about the conflict. And part of me felt as Israeli upset because I kept telling them, listen, the conflict one day, hopefully soon, will be resolved. And then what will be with your identity? If your identity is around a conflict that will end, you will stay with an empty identity. And I think sometimes the same, like this, they're very, very busy with this. And this year, and in this program, we try to ask why. Why so many of the young Jews around the world mostly engage with Israel when it comes to the conflict? And we find out something which I think is really interesting. In the program, what we do, we really want to connect the participants to Jerusalem. And we do it by two things. They do volunteer work, but they also do internship. For the Americans, we thought it can be a good way to sell the program to them because they really wanted to make sure that in their CV they have an internship. The Israelis doesn't get it. They were like, why we should do like the work for someone else if we don't get paid? But the Americans get it. But I want to say something about that. We choose NGOs and that deal specifically with the challenges of the Israeli society. And if you think about it, it's exactly the opposite than birthright. Not to say anything really about birthright, but when you take kids 10 days and you show them only the beauty of Israel, when they come to campus and they hear about other things that are happening here, they feel kind of there is a problem. And what we do by having them work in NGOs that deal with the conflict, we have 3 NGOs that deal with the conflict, and the participant work there twice a week. We have 18 kids who work at the Knesset, at the parliament, with 18 Knesset members across the board. And we have kids who work with NGOs, for example, who work with a woman who doesn't get their divorce document from their husband. So what is happening is that the kids, the chanichim, actually face the challenges of Israel, but they do it through activism. So they come to, like, they work at the Knesset with Ilan Gilon from the Meretz party, which is completely at the left, and he speaks with them about the biggest challenges of the Israeli society as the way he sees it, but he invites them, Israelis and Americans, to be an activist and to change it. And I think I find out that this is kind of a door for a new type of conversation about the Israeli society, and especially about the conflict, because when they feel that they are part of the solution, not only part of the problem, you can see a completely different approach and a language that they can develop.
One of the things that I've seen that you've written about, Leon, Leon writes often in the Times of Israel as a blogger through some of the Institute's platforms. I've seen you struggle out loud with what you want from American Jews in terms of their support for Israel, especially at difficult times. And part of what we're navigating here is this tension around what do you have to understand that licenses you to have a real opinion? What's the level of loyalty that we want out of each other that transcends our disappointment with each other? And then what's the permission to be angry or disappointed about the state of each other's civilization? And it does go both ways. It's Israelis frustrated or angry or ashamed about things that American Jews too. How do you think about that calculus between what you expect and what you're willing to offer in return?
Another easy question. So I actually want to start, I want to relate what you just asked to what you asked Yoav earlier about the question of whether it's precisely someone's ability to effectuate change which makes me less tolerant of their opinion. And I want to start just by sharing an experience that I had the year that we were in another experience that I had the year we were in Berkeley, which was that at that time there was a resolution that the Berkeley student government passed to have the Board of Governors of the University of California adopt BDS again and disinvest from certain 3 companies. And there was an all-night town hall meeting, and I went there because they asked. I was visiting Israeli faculty member, and a few of the students asked me to come. And I came, and they had allotted 2 minutes to speak with a long list of who was going to go on all night. I came and spoke, and I left, and I said, I am so glad that I do not live here. As much as Berkeley is a wonderful place to live, the idea that I will have to prove my loyalty, and I will be forced into advocating positions which are not my positions, because I'm on the left side of the Israeli political spectrum. So getting to your first question, I think that it's possible to be threatening, not just because one can effectuate change, but because the first thing that we need, both as human beings and as political agents, is to have a sense of trust in someone else, that someone accepts me and accepts my existence. And I think that what makes the conversation, from my experience and from what I read about Israel, so charged in a kind of visceral and oftentimes vitriolic way is that space doesn't exist of saying, you trust me, I'm accepted, and my existence is accepted. And so I think that it's not just a question of is this person going to be effectual as a change agent? Yes, and therefore I'm attacking. No, the basic question is, does that person accept me? And when the conversation slides quite easily from criticism of Israel or Israeli policies to questions about the very existence of Israel, then that sense of safe space gets taken away quickly. And then people like me, who are even on the left side of the Israeli political spectrum, feel that we don't have a safe space to voice those opinions. So I think that that's often what's going on. In terms of when I sit here in Israel, and I think often about what it is that I want from Jews who live outside, or Zionists who live outside of Israel, or Jews, those are 2 different conversations, but to posture themselves. The first is that I would like them to have a sense of, how should I say it, chesed, a certain sense of giving the benefit of the doubt. Now, when I say giving the benefit of the doubt, I do not at all mean to be forgiving or to ignore the grave injustices that are on the ground here all the time. What I mean to say is that there is a way in which I think that there are a lot of amazing, beautiful things that are happening here, day in and day out, whether it's in supermarkets or whether it's in hospitals, which become not even part of the conversation. And the conversation becomes distilled down to very, very pointed and charged issues in a way that's unfair. And then if we were to do the same thing towards the United States, If I were to say, well, look, let's open up the New York Times today and look what happened to an African American who was pulled over and shot because he was reaching for his ID and declared that he had a handgun. Then if I were to focus only on that and start the conversation about the United States on that, then it would make the conversation very difficult. So partly it's a question of how you posture yourself towards Israel and what's happening here and Israel's flaws. And partly, I think that there's a place of self-reflection and humility, which I, as an Israeli Jew, and that's the way I'm speaking right now, often feel is lacking in terms of how North Americans who are critical of Israel posture themselves. And when I say that there's a critical voice that's lacking, I'll say two things, and then I'll pass the microphone over. Number one is, I will say that, and of course this is all political, so I won't say putting politics aside. I smiled. This was the first time, Yehuda knows this because he apparently reads my blogs. This is the first time that since I moved to Israel in 1992, I voted in a U.S. election. I've, for ideological reasons, felt that this is where my home is. I should not vote in North America. And for the first time ever, I voted, and it was a vote because I think that Trump is dangerous. And so I voted against him. And when he was elected, there was a part of me that smiled. And the part of me that smiled was, well, it's time for North Americans and North American Jews to posture themselves with the adequate humility of the fact that for all of those people who think that he's a disaster, he's now the President of the United States. And if I want to now talk about the President of the United States, I can say Trump is X, therefore you are X, which is a lot of the language that I as an Israeli feel violated by and controlled by. So the first thing is I think that there's a kind of humility that's necessitated about that. And the second humility that's necessitated is North American Jewry is, I think, an inspiration at so many levels. The one thing that North American Jewry doesn't have to deal with, which Israeli Jews have to deal with, which is that everything is out there all the time. All of the foibles and all of the ugliness and all of the failures are out there all of the time. And so there's also a way in which that causes a kind of optical illusion. And so the second thing that I ask for is a kind of awareness that, as beautiful as our community is, part of that beauty and part of that sparkling veneer that we have is also made possible because a lot of the ugliness doesn't come to the surface.
Okay, so let me switch gears a little bit, which is one of the you can tell when the North American Jewish community is anxious about an issue was when it starts projecting a buzzword. The buzzword is usually the response to that which no longer exists. So we have to now promote that idea. So there's a whole history of Jewish communal buzzwords. One of them that emerged out of especially during the 2014 Gaza war, was unity. Right? We have to stand together in unity. And I, just being a natural skeptic, I get very anxious when people talk about the need for Jewish unity among the Jewish people. It sounds to me hegemonic. It sounds like what you want me to do is get in line with some set of ideological commitments, especially during a war that that was at least worthy of a moral conversation. And therefore, I get nervous about unity mapping itself on a conversation for a Jewish people that is diverse and complicated. But I want to ask you, is unity desirable? Right? That's the panel, right? Can we be, what was the title called? Can we be one, or what is the us? And I'm wondering what's the desirability for you about Jewish unity, about thinking about ourselves as one people? What might there still be possible or desirable in that conversation?
So I think that the desirability of unity, or the idea of unity, is to think about the Jewish people and Israel as a product of a collective experiment that we are engaged in together, a collaborative project of building here in Israel a state that reflects the very best of the Jewish people, and that reflects our highest values and ideals, and that calls upon the Jews around the world, to be engaged in this project in a way that respects the sovereignty of Israel and the citizenship, the obligations and responsibilities of citizenship that comes with it for Israelis, but that also invites diaspora Jewry to be engaged in that. And so there is, for me, a desire in thinking about unity in that way. The danger is when unity translates into political unity, and the idea that we then therefore have to agree. And I think that is impossible, because our community is far more deeply divided, I think, than we often realize. We are fighting over deeply different and even incommensurable views about the future of this state. So I think it's not possible empirically, and I think it's also not desirable. And to use a historical parallel, which you might disagree with, but the last time that Jews had sovereignty, when Jews were here under Roman rule in the year 70, a certain group of zealots took control over the Jewish Commonwealth and over the old city, the city and the temple, and ultimately we didn't fight them, and the temple was destroyed. And so the lesson I take from that that I draw from that historical lesson is that political unity is not always a value, and that sometimes we have to fight those in our community with whom we disagree. And I really do think that we are dealing here with deeply incommensurable views for the future of this place.
Chaya, let me ask you a take on that question also, because one of the other hats that you wear is as an activist here in the city of Jerusalem and in the state of Israel around religious pluralism and the legitimacy of multiple voices. And in order to do that, you have to have sharp elbows. So you too are caught in between being an activist for the version of Israel that you want, and I'm wondering where the whole question about collectivity, Daniel introduced the term mamlachtiyut before, that notion of belonging to the whole society and projecting through your students and otherwise back to North America the necessity of one story, one people, one voice.
It's a hard one. Maybe first I will say that I have the best job in the world, because I get to see every year for 9 months how the Jewish community can potentially be. Because I think that this idea of having Israelis and North American living together and studying together, it doesn't exist anywhere. Like for 9 months they live together, and sometimes I look at them from the side, I see how they study together, I see how they volunteer together, and I think to myself, really? One day, like this is possible. This is how the Jewish community can be. And they're not unite. And I think part of what, like, they make fun of us, that every other word in the program is pluralistic. And they hate that word, and because we keep saying it. And some of the kids told me once, Chaya, because you so insist that the space will be pluralistic, I can't be a fully Orthodox, and she cannot be a fully secular, because when there is a pluralistic space, you cannot really be fully who you are, and you pay a price. But I will say, regarding my activism, first I will share with you that I'm involved in few different things, and in all of the different projects that I'm involved in, I'm working with Israelis, that are born in America. And it's not a coincidence. When I was very much involved in the Women of the Wall, and now I'm working on creating a kashrut certificates outside of the rabbinic court, and I'm working a lot with Jews around marriage, like civil marriage, with like different rabbis from different streams. In all of those different initiatives, I'm working with Americans who moved to Israel, because they get it. They get it that you don't have to force the public domain to look like yourself, and you still can be who you are. And I think this is and many times my Israeli friend, there is like a language in Israel, a sad language, that says, why do we need to have relationship with Americans? Like, there is nothing like in common between us. And I think we in Jerusalem definitely see that if we really want to bring change to Israel in that field, we must collaborate with our brothers and sisters from North America, because there is something that they see that we can't see. But I will say that the biggest challenge of what I do today in Israel, in Jerusalem, is that I'm in a very direct way, I'm opposing the mamlachtiyut,
National something or other.
And something. and it's hard, and I think it's but I would maybe suggest a different word than unity. I would suggest solidarity, and I will tell you that I was involved in a big campaign here in Jerusalem around like the buses. Like was a few years ago, the Haredi community decided that women must sit in the back and men need to sit in the front. And what happened was that a group of a very lefty, secular Jerusalemite decided to go on all the buses with the tupim, drummers, and like to sit, like women will sit next to men and the opposite, and this is how they will change. And it just escalated. Like more, the Haredi started to protest. And what we did is we connected with women from Mea Shearim and Geula and Nevi'im, like from the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox neighborhood, and we looked for women in that side of the city that also are not happy with what's happening in the buses, not because they are feminists, just because for them it's inconvenient to, like if their girl who is 15 years old go on a bus with her 10 years old brother and he needs to sit there and she needs to sit in the back. It's just not convenient. So we looked for them. And then when we gathered together, secular Jerusalemite, American Jerusalemite, Haredi women, then we could create the change that you will see today when you go on Israeli buses. There is like a sticker that says that no one can force you to sit in a different part of the bus. But I think I learned from that the key is solidarity. And I think we don't have to think, we don't have to view the reality as the same, but we must find where our common grounds. And I think it's possible. And maybe last sentence is that we just end our third year, and we spent the last Shabbat on a kibbutz in Gedi. And it was amazing to see the American woman taught our Israeli women that they can go up and read from the Torah. It sounds weird, but it's happening every year. That the Israeli women, Orthodox or secular, never participated in rituals, in Jewish rituals. They're either sitting in the back of the synagogue or they're not in the synagogue. And their sisters from North America taught them that they can do it. They can do it halachically. And what I saw a synagogue that they created on the kibbutz without a mechitza, but some of the boys and girls seated not together. Some of them had like mixed sitting, and the woman went to read from the Torah. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, this is how solidarity looks like. And it's not a unity, but it's something else. And I think maybe this is the key.
So let me ask the last question to you, Leon, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience, which is, Chaya talked a lot about some lessons from American Jewry to here in Israel, and actually part of Daniel's lecture was a trenchant critique of what Israel, in its focus on the Judaism of being, what it kind of left behind in terms of the Judaism of becoming. And there are many projects underway in Israeli society of that retrieval process of secular Jews looking for Jewish heritage, not in order to not be secular anymore, but in order to articulate a more coherent theory of their Jewishness in the society. So we know that side of the story. But what I want to ask you is, you're here in Jerusalem. You live, teach, breathe Torah here in Jerusalem. What do you want American Jews, and you have a captive audience who are not distracted, what do you want American Jews to hear as a Torah coming back to America that could be useful for, not criticism of America, but a Torah from America that could be useful for American Jews in navigating the many significant challenges that American Jews face?
So thank you for that opportunity. I'd actually like to kind of piggyback on what Chaya just said and just slightly turn the tables and say the following. We have the zchut, the real privilege of sitting in this amazing place, this amazing courtyard, which is thanks to the vision of Rabbi David Hartman of blessed memory, Mori V'Rabbi, my teacher, who brought North American pluralism to Israel, and in that sense, he's very much a kind of beacon of North America and North American pluralism here in Jerusalem, and has educated basically two generations or a generation and a half of significant figures in Israel on the coattails of that pluralism. One of the things that I learned from him which I think exists uniquely in Israeli society, at least compared to North American Jewry, is, and this gets to your question of unity, which is, instead of looking for unity, and I would even say instead of looking for solidarity, what I look for is machloket, disagreement. And what I think happens in many, I was teaching some of the interns today, and I shared this with them. The model of pluralism, Jewish pluralism, that one tends to get, not always, but one tends to get in North America, is the panel discussion. And you have 3 or 4 people, each of whom has their protected space. But they don't have to fight over it because there's a moderator who's going to say, now pass the microphone over to someone else. And at the end of the evening, they'll each go their separate ways and retreat to their private domain, and they don't have to fight. And the discourse is more civil because of that. And what I would say I think Israel offers a very, very flawed vision of, but still a vision of, is what it is to be in machloket, what it is to be in disagreement, what it is to have not just different visions about what the country ought to look like and what the shared public spaces ought to look like, but to be forced into having that argument, to be forced into playing that out, to be forced into being in conversation with and rubbing elbows next to someone and not being able at the end of the evening when the lights go off to say, all right, see you at the next panel discussion. No, I'm going to see you tomorrow morning when I wake up. I'm going to come across you tomorrow morning at the university or on the bus. And therefore there is a way, I would say sometimes what that ends up, at minimum, what that ends up in is a kind of ability to relate to one another as human beings. And what it maximally and sometimes opens up to is a discourse which is more tolerant, oddly enough, which is more tolerant, even though pluralism comes from there. What many times happens, and this gets to something you said earlier, is that the range of opinions that are accepted here is actually wider. If you listen to Israeli media, the range of opinions that you will hear on in media here, in mainstream media in Israel, is wider than you will get in mainstream media in the United States, even if you compare Fox and CNN and CNBC or whatever. What you will hear from members of parliament here is wider range of opinion than you will hear from members of Congress in the United States. So what I would say is we offer a flawed vision, but a vision of what it is to be in serious and engaged disagreement and still feel a sense of common or shared ground.
I will say, just anecdotally, one of the things that I oftentimes observe is that, and I see this in my own family and in others, that there's oftentimes a tension in the American Jewish community of family members who can't be with people of another generation based on their political attitudes, especially around Israeli politics. And when you come to Israel, you find that people have radically different Israeli politics than their family members, because here it's not Israeli politics, it's politics. And therefore we're in some ways creating a proxy version of an anxiety around our ability to talk across difference that's much worse there about here than it is actually here. So I want to thank our panelists, and I'm going to open up for some questions to the audience. Yeah, Ben is going to bring around the microphone. Go ahead, right here.
This is on. I'd like to question part of the premise of this whole session, and specifically whether what you're describing is a problem with American Jews in general or American Jews who didn't go to Jewish day schools. Because what you're describing, I don't really see very much among Jewish kids who've gone to day schools. And perhaps one needs to ask, why is that? Why are so few Jewish kids going to day schools, and look at experiments of chance, such as in Quebec, where there's a very high percentage of Jewish kids who go to day schools, and you don't see as much of this issue.
Do you want to respond?
So just to clarify, the issue about which you're talking is the sense of alienation from Israel that I gestured at before. So in my experience working on campuses and engaging with people in my generation right now in North America, many of the folks that I know that are involved in organizations on the left, like J Street or Open Hillel, or if not now, or other organizations that you're seeing that have emerged over the past years, are in fact products of day schools and Jewish summer camps, and are people that are deeply, deeply engaged and committed to Jewish life. And something that I think has been hard for me as I've engaged in mainstream Jewish spaces has been the attempt to often mischaracterize their motivations or their depth of knowledge and engagement. Many of them have spent time in Israel on study abroad programs, on gap year programs, and so not all of them, but many of them are deeply engaged in Israel, have spent time here, and really are the best and brightest of our community. And I just want to echo what I said before, but maybe a bit more clearly, that the ways that they're looking to engage critically with Israel are not a manifestation of a distancing from Israel, but rather of a desire to engage here. And actually, we can use that as a mechanism for engaging them. And so we shouldn't see it as a cause for alienation, but rather as a source for engagement and a way to engage that critical discourse in meaningful and productive ways within our community.
I just want to add to that. I do think that the data is backwards to that hypothesis. There's a few examples to that effect, one of which is that, whereas short trips to Israel oftentimes catalyze positive feelings about Israel and the Jewish people, longer trips to Israel tend to invite much more anxiety and ambivalence because, by definition, you're not seeing the curated, nice version. And so you have this paradox, and it's true in day school education also, a paradox of Israel education, which is the more that Israel education someone has, the more likely they are to have ambivalent feelings about Israel. And therefore, I think from the perspective of serious education, the answer is not do less, right? That would feel like rendering inferior something that's a thick and significant feature of Jewish identity, and therefore we should teach it a lot. I think it challenges us to, if we're going to engage Israel seriously, whether it's through day schools or Israel travel or otherwise, we have to be aware that we're actually engaging people into their full selves and the full complexities of these challenges, rather than giving them a smaller, curated version of a complicated story. Let's take another question. It's up to you. It's right here.
I'm a centrist, but I'm really frustrated because I'm part of a Muslim-Jewish dialogue for the past few years where the Muslims don't believe in the existence of the state of Israel, and I'm stuck with a bunch of people who are left of me who are complete apologists for Israel and about the border checks and everything. And from being here, I certainly see both sides, but by the time the rabbi leaves and I'm the only one there, and I'm also the only one with more Jewish knowledge, I end up feeling like I've just got to 100% stick up for Israel, and I can't say that I know about the seamier sides, that I've been to Lud and everything, because so many people know nothing, and I'm scared about BDS. So I don't know if you could comment on that.
Can maybe. I will try to answer. If I didn't answer you, let me know. But I think first I will share with you that this year, the beginning of the year, an American father of one of the participants came to Israel 10 days before the program started, and he wanted to talk to me, and he said to me literally, Chaya, I just want to make sure my son will be Zionist in the end of the program, and I want to make sure, and I'm quoting him, and I'm saying, seriously, I'm not trying to make fun of him, but he say, I want to make sure when he go to Princeton in the end of the year, I want him to join the forces of the anti-BDS movement, and I want to make sure it's happening. And I said to him, look, what we are trying to do here is we are inviting them to eat a buffet dinner. I'm going to present them different opinions and different texts, and they are going to be every other Shabbat in a different Israeli home. Some of them are in a settlement, and some of them are in the midst of Tel Aviv, and they're going to hear different things. And the only thing I can make sure is that everything they will hear here at the Institute will be sophisticated, that we will respect them by bringing the best speakers to speak about all the hard issues, and we will provide not answers, we're going to provide ways to think. And it's only 3 years the program has been running, but last year I went to visit some of the kids in their campuses, and they told me, which was really amazing, that they are working in different capacities. They are doing things, what you called against the BDS, but they do it from such different angles. And I think what they're trying to promote is a mature and sophisticated conversation about Israel, because I think that's how they feel, that their American identity and their Zionist identity are coming from the same place. Because I think I think sometimes it's hard because you feel as an American that to be, let's say, I don't know, liberal and believe in shivyon zchuyot, equality, as an American it's an important thing, but then when it comes to speak about Israel, you need to take sometimes a different stand. And what is happening? You want to have one united identity. And I think what they're trying to do, they're trying to speak about the BDS, but from a sophisticated place, and from a place that is not afraid to ask hard questions about what is happening now, about what Israel can be. And I think, and when I visited Penn, I think it was, or Yale, I don't remember, one of the kids told me, Chana, and I do that by working with the Muslim group on campus, because I feel like I'm not coming from a place, I'm not apologetic, because I know what I know what Israel, why I care about that place, and what I think about what is happening there. But from the same time, I'm this new generation of American Jew who doesn't want to choose between being Israelis and Zionists. And I think from that place they can do a lot of things together. So I don't know if I answer your question, but try.
Just a quick comment. I think that one of the challenges of our community, and it's a difficult challenge, is to do two things simultaneously. And that is, on one hand, to defend Israel robustly against the various threats to its future, whether it's military threats by enemies in the Middle East or other threats of people challenging its very right to exist. And at the same time, also not being afraid to speak out and criticize trends within Israeli society that are also threatening its future. And those things are different, but they can work together. And we, I think, have been historically better at defending Israel and not also speaking out against trends in Israeli society about which we should be concerned. And the question and challenge is that, can we do both at the same time? And can we see them as complementary, as both ensuring and defending and protecting Israel's future?
No, there's somebody with a mic in the back.
Sorry. I want to just return quickly to the analogy that was made about police murdering people of color in the United States, because I think it's really instructive in that, as an American Jew, a young American Jew who both adores Israel and regularly, vocally and sometimes fiercely is very critical of it, I hope, as an American, that when people come to the United States or read about the United States, they do start with racial injustice, because I think you learn a lot about America that way. When my British family flies in, I'm horrified if the first thing they don't talk about is the barbaric state of our healthcare system, for example. And so I'm curious about whether you think there's room for that conversation starting from a place of justice and injustice, given kind of Israel's unique situation in the international arena and the scrutiny that it's under, that allows for people to start from that place without violating any kind of sacrosanct safe space that's essential to diaspora-Israel dialogue?
It's a great question. What I would say is, and I'm speaking just from the heart, if all someone can say about me, if all someone can look about in me are the things that I'm doing wrong, as critical as I am of myself, and I have this conversation pretty much on a daily basis with my wife, as critical as I am about myself, I want there to be other things noticed too. And if that's the only thing that's noticed, even though I want to become a better person, I'm going to be exhausted. And so I think the same thing here. I am so critical of Israel as an engaged and loving member of Israeli society. There is hardly an aspect of Israeli society that you could not engage me in and hear voice of pain and critique. But if the only thing that the person has to say to me is to look only at those things, then there's a sense of that kind of lack of trust and a lack of reliability and a lack of safe space that I was trying to acknowledge before. I think that what happens here in Israel, and it especially happens when conversations about Israel take place outside of Israel, such as the BDS conversation I was at Berkeley, is that Israel is so much on trial, and Israelis are so much on trial, that there's a sense of total exhaustion. And I don't think that exists for most North Americans or citizens of the United States to the same degree. And you can hear LeBron James talk about when his home was when there was graffiti painted on his home, and he had to explain to his daughter, and he can talk about racial injustice in the United States. But the bottom line is that a lot of people go to the United States, and a lot of people engage the United States and are able to engage and visit the United States gleefully and say, yes, there's a problem of racial justice, but that's not going to be the only thing that I'm going to focus on. So all I have to say is that it's really a question of balance and proportions. And if the balance isn't right, and if the proportion isn't right, I can only speak personally. You lose me as a conversationalist.
Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
So my question's a little in a different area, but if we're talking about unity and coming together as one people, I think that the situation you create with the kids or the teenagers or the 18-year-olds is a little bit artificial. It's sort of like summer camp, where it's easy to be kosher, it's easy to celebrate Shabbat, it's easy to, even though you have difficult conversations. So my question is really, what do you do with halakha? How does that stop us from coming together and being unified as one people? So, yes, after 9 months or however they're long together, they're going to go home and yes, they're going to appreciate the fact that there are other ways of being Jewish, but that's not going to help them integrate, possibly.
So I disagree on that, and I'm happy to disagree, because first, they're not going back homes, and this is something to remember. Both communities are going to campuses and army, where this conversation is continue, and especially the Israelis are change agent, because this conversation is not happening, especially not in the army, not enough, at least. First, I will tell you that the halachic discussions are in ongoing discussions until the end of the year. It's not something that you overcome at some point. And we have some alumni here, so they know who I'm talking about. No names mentioned, but in our first week last year, before the program started, we got a kid from one of the periphery cities in Israel, and he come from an Orthodox background. And in his yeshiva, they didn't want him to come to the program because it's not halachic enough, and he decided to join. In the first week, he came to my office very angry and said to me, I'm leaving the program. And I said, why? And he said, I'm willing to speak about Reformed Jews in class. I'm willing to talk about them theoretically, but to see one of my friends at the Moadon putting on tefillin, live in a program like that. And he wanted to leave. And I thought, great, that's an amazing opportunity to open a discussion. But I will say that first, for me, there is no such a thing, halacha, which is like one narrow thing. And I grew up in an ultra-Orthodox family in Har Nof, which is an extreme religious community. And I think this is something that we want to challenge again and again. And I will say that what we try to do with them is we try to help them to really come up with an identity. And one of the ways to do it, and this is why I, from the beginning, wanted to run this program, I wanted to create Talmidei v'Talmidot Chachamim. Help me, Yehuda. Talmidei v'Talmidot Chachamim, כאילו, educated disciple students, because I think there is not enough. And I think if our common language is only about Israel, we're losing something. And I think that I want all the 60 to be what is for me to be in Chavruta alumni, to know how to open a Talmud page, to know what to say about like halachic discussion, about feminism, and about other things. I want them to be educated, and I think this is the key. And I think that's what the Jewish people, I think, need the most right now, and the Israeli society need the most right now. So this is one of the ways to do it. And I can tell you that I see the biggest change among the Israelis. And we just ended a year, and 2 of the secular Israelis came to me and say, Chaya, it's weird, but we feel that if we must define ourselves, we are conservative Jews. And we never thought about it before. Mamash, they're completely secular, but suddenly they find a home, and I think it's amazing in that sense. That not that we're trying to convert them into one of the streams, but I think it's amazing because if you look at other gap years for Israelis in Israel, there is like a thing to say that religious go to yeshivot, and those who are going to be secular are going to like mechinot, like the program that we have. But we see the opposite. We really see the opposite when we are in an honest like conversation. You see that they're not afraid to ask questions, and they are not trying to rebel against something, because there is nothing to rebel against. You can just be who you want to be.
So let me just conclude. We're going to end tonight by just with one brief comment to paraphrase something that Franz Rosenzweig wrote in the early 20th century, and I'm saying that in honor of my friend Leon, who just published a book on Franz Rosenzweig, and therefore is one of a handful of people in the world, including Franz Rosenzweig, who understands what Franz Rosenzweig said. But Rosenzweig talks about confidence and the way in which the study of Torah, in the fullest sense of the word, is supposed to create nothing more than confidence. And I think one of the themes that's here, and one of the themes that we want to continue to think about, especially in the intergenerational conversation, is that oftentimes people with strong ideological beliefs believe that the work of education is about imprinting those ideological beliefs on others. That's a totalitarian educational system, and it actually is very powerful right now and very resonant, especially when we talk about Israel. Most likely, that can last for a short period of time, but it invites a tremendous amount of profound resistance. So what happens, though, when, in order to create an intergenerational conversation, in order to create a stable relationship with Israel, we move from thinking about our job as being about the imprinting of identity and move instead to think about becoming people of self-confidence. Thank you to all of our panelists for tonight. We'll see you tomorrow morning.